begin. Hi, everybody. Thanks for wanting to take care of yourselves and your artistic practices by getting prepared for a wide range of potential emergencies and disasters, and also learning about business insurance. I'm just going to hand it over to my friend Cameron. Take us away.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly, and thanks to Riska for having us here today. I want to start off by commending all of you all for showing up for this presentation. I think it's one of the hardest to sell to folks in terms of interest levels and sometimes a sense of urgency. I think emergency preparedness is something that we all know is important, but doesn't feel like the priority for the week. So the fact that you're here, I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Um, I love to give a webinar in like ideal conditions when it's like super quiet and like I feel like I'm in the zone. And today is like the most insane things happening around me. Like they've decided to clear the power lines right behind me and there's just chainsaws everywhere. And then our HVAC has had some issues. So somebody's coming at noon-ish to check that out, which is going to send my Beagle into like a mania. So I'm channeling some inner calm right now, but if you hear any background noise, I just want to go ahead and apologize. It is a Monday, but I'm super excited to be here with you. As Molly mentioned, today's presentation is not heavy in terms of slides. I think there's only 10 or 11 slides, but the content can get a little bit heavy. The nice part about today's presentation is that we have ample time. So there will be ample time for conversation if you're interested. I'm also a person who doesn't like to call folks out in virtual webinars and make you engage. If you're just like listening to this on a walk or whatever, feel free to interact with what fits for you in the moment. But I am going to share my screen and it's going to look a little funny for the first second. Probably a smiling stingray. It's just my favorite way to start a presentation. And now we are on our slide deck. So again, thanks for having us here today. Um, it will be a pretty quick presentation, but we'll cover a lot of ground. First, I would like to talk to you about the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, which I know is super selfish to talk about yourself when you meet somebody, but really think it's helpful to understand the origin of the organization as well as all the work we're doing right now before we jump into personal and professional safety. And I'll say this is kind of twofold. We start by talking about personal preparedness because we think it's important that you protect yourself before you consider all the important things for protecting your artistic practice. Then we'll go over a few resources and we'll have ample time for any questions. Molly, I didn't ask this, but if folks have questions throughout the presentation, is there a chat box that's best for them to pop that into?
There is a chat, but it's also a really small group, so feel free to use whatever feels best to y'all, either unmute or drop it in the chat. And if I see stuff pop up in the chat, I'll flag it for you.
Great, thank you so much. And I realized I didn't even introduce myself. I'm Cameron Baxter Lewis, Director of Grants, Programs, and Training at the Craft Emergency Relief Fund. I'm coming to you from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We're going to talk a little bit about North Carolina today, specific to Helene response. But that's who I am, and I will provide my contact information at the end of the presentation. So let's talk about good old Surf Plus. So the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known as Surf Plus, was started by craft artists and for craft artists. And the origin story is pretty simple. Basically, craft artists would go to a lot of shows, which they still do today, but this was in the 80s, and they would always hear about somebody who couldn't attend because they were having some sort of emergency. And that emergency could be any type of thing that might have happened in their life. This could be an injury, this could be an illness, this could be a car accident, this could be a studio fire, climate related disaster, what have you. And basically, what they would do is they would physically pass around a hat for that person. And they'd collect donations. And The cool thing about that was obviously the monetary support, which was the most needed thing for that person in the moment because they were not able to attend the show and maybe had additional expenses. But it was also really letting them know that they were part of a community, that these craft artists understood where they were coming from, that they were also operating on pretty thin margins and didn't have a huge financial safety net. So it was really kind of being part of that community, I think, was equally important. And these super ambitious folks decided to formalize this model into a nonprofit. I think everybody thinks they want to start a nonprofit until you start a nonprofit and realize it's like the most overwhelming thing in the world. But kudos to them. We are about to celebrate 40 years next year. So obviously something they set up worked very, very well. In addition to emergency relief grants, which we'll talk about in just a moment, Craft Surf Plus is also known for its advocacy. So we sit at a lot of tables um, with particular focus on climate-related disaster policy, but we always advocate for craft artists, saying, well, how does this work for craft artists? Have you thought about how they earn their income? Have you thought about how this policy might not or might exclude them from being eligible? And I will say we're very excited that we, for many, many years, asked FEMA to consider having tool replacement as part of their other needs assistance. And I was joking recently, I had totally given up on this initiative. I think it was 10 years we've been asking, and 10 years and been going, like, that's not possible. There's just no way. It's too confusing. And then when I had kind of convinced the team to move on, they gave us a call and said that they were going to do it. So I can't believe that there is now a program for folks who've experienced a federally declared emergency to receive assistance for tool replacement. It's not a huge sum of money, but it is helpful. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to share more information um, with Molly, who can share it with you all. But that's the types of conversations that we're a part of. We're really just in the room saying, have you thought about artists while you're creating this? And usually the answer is no. That has not been our primary concern with policy. So I talked about our emergency relief grants. These are top of mind right now. These are $3,000 grants for craft artists. And folks always go, well, what is a craft artist? And we say we don't define that for the field, but for the purposes of this program, there are some mediums that are pretty typically eligible. Some of those that immediately come to mind would be, and I always forget one, but wood artist, fiber artist, glass artist, ceramic artist, and metal artist are probably the big five. But really, if there's a lot of evidence of handwork in a 3D material, then that could also be considered as well. We do have full guidelines on our website. They're a lot more eloquent than what I just said, but that's just kind of a simple cheat sheet. So these emergency relief grants are open year round. So if a craft artist has an unforeseen emergency, which is the second question, what does that mean? And again, I've given you some examples, but injuries, accidents, illnesses, climate-related disasters, which I'll talk about in a minute, studio fires, taking care of a loved one while they are sick is also eligible, or really kind of any combination of really maybe more minor emergencies that have snowballed into a pretty catastrophic event for that artist. So we do consider everything for a case-by-case basis, but those are some general categories of emergencies that we see more often than not. We are super, super, super busy with Helene response. In the past 3 weeks, we have awarded more grants than we have in the last 2 years. So if I'm rambly today or if I'm not making sense, that's in part why. The regions that were hit, in particular Western North Carolina, have a lot of craft artists. So this emergency relief grant program has been running full steam at the moment. If you know any craft artists who've had an emergency, please definitely encourage them to apply. But this is our flagship program. When most folks think of Surf Plus, this is what they think of. But we realized some time ago that it wasn't enough to just do emergency relief grants. It would also be helpful to invest in artists ahead of an emergency. And this is where our Get Ready grant program um, came to fruition. These are $1,000 grants. They used to be 500, they're now 1,000. And therefore, craft artists to do any sort of activity that prevents a future emergency. And so those activities, what I love about this program is those activities can really be anything as long as it protects you from something that could happen in the future. Most folks think of this in terms of like physical mitigation. So maybe they do studio safety um, activities, so installing hurricane shutters or putting in smoke detectors. Uh, but you could also use this for archiving your artwork. So for paying for any sort of subscription to inventory your artwork. You could use this to beef up um, photos of your artwork. So maybe you invest in having some professional photos taken that are used not only to boost your business, but also to inventory your work. Really anything that reasonably prevents a future emergency is eligible. So that's what I kind of love about it. Some folks get like super creative in these, but again, most folks tend to do more physical mitigation stuff. This program is not open year round. It is a limited pool of funding, so we run a lottery for this, but it's open twice a year. And the good and bad part about today's presentation is it is open now, but it closes tomorrow at 5 p.m. So if you're on this, if you are a craft artist, if you're interested, today would be that day to submit an application in case you have some strange technical error. Goodness knows what happens. So definitely check that out if you're interested. The next cycle, just in case you're not ready for today, will likely be next spring. But you can sign up for our newsletter on our website to find out when that will come out. We typically start advertising it a month or two ahead of time. Um, so a really great program. We know that when we invest in artist preparedness, we really end up saving in the long run from the effects of an emergency. So the last thing I'll say about our grants and programs is that we have a gifts in kind program, and these are donations from businesses that support craft artists typically. And those donations go to folks who also receive an emergency relief grant. We work with a few partners in this space. Specifically, I want to call out Jim Scott from Scott Kilns. He donates 3 kilns a year to artists who have lost their kiln. As you can imagine, with Hurricane Helene, we've seen a lot of kilns that have been lost. Also work with Rio Grande, who gives credits to their customers so they can go and purchase materials. Same with Penguin Clay Pottery. They offer gift cards to folks to go and purchase materials who may have lost them as a result of an emergency. So it's a nice extra boost. We know it's not going to get folks all the way there, but I think any support we can garner from the craft community is helpful in recovery. I could throw big numbers at you in the last 5 years, $3 million. All of those numbers are wrong now as of the last 3 weeks, but they were accurate as of September 30th. So we've been very busy. We've worked a lot with craft artists. And the one thing I'll say is I've been in this position for the last 5 years, and both the emergency relief and Get Ready programs have nearly quadrupled in the number of artists that are applying. So I think that's really positive, and that more folks are hearing about us also speaks to the level of need that is out there for both of these programs. So it's been interesting to see that evolution. And I will also mention, because Molly was talking about being in Puerto Rico last week, um, in typical years, Puerto Rican craft artists and artisans have been about a quarter of our grant recipients for both programs. So that is the biggest geographic area that we work with. And that was really intentionally designed after Hurricane Maria by working with some incredible local champions that have helped socialize Surf Plus to Puerto Rico. and specifically Jaime Suarez and Zulma Santiago, who are well-known leaders in the craft space there. So really excited to see that work grow. Okay, I've talked about myself or us a lot, so I'm going to pivot to personal preparedness. I've been working in um, emergency preparedness and response for almost 20 years. Um, and it's kind of tough to say whether or not these types of messages are received or make a huge shift in folks' behavioral changes. But today we're going to kind of cover some basic steps of an emergency plan because I know that you're an audience who's already investing in this. You've shown up today. You've probably come with your own thoughts and questions, and perhaps even given some consideration to what you would need to do to protect yourself in your practice. So we're going to go through some basic steps. If there's anything I missed, there's a great resource, ready.gov. It's going to go into a lot more detail than we'll have the time to cover today. But if I say something or I say a number and you miss it, ready.gov will be able to guide you in the right direction. So with that little intro, we're going to talk about the steps that you can do to protect yourself from an emergency. And depending on where you go, everybody approaches this a little bit differently. So the steps that we talk about are just one way of thinking through how to create an emergency plan, but it really depends on you and what your needs are and how you approach planning. So I'm going to give you a pretty formulaic approach to it, but feel free to alter this to fit your needs and to fit your style. I think that's the most important part with emergency preparedness is it's not a one size fits all approach, and not everybody's going to really um, invest in all elements of their plan. So decide which ones speak most to you, and then try to spend some time on those areas. So, with that really long and rambly intro, step one is make a plan. So first thing you want to know is where are you going to get your information about emergencies? There's a thing called a wireless emergency alert, WEA, and these are short messages from usually authorized government entities, whether that's federal, state, local, tribal, what have you, that are broadcast from cell towers directly to your phone. So if you have a smartphone, which I assume many folks do, you can go on your phone, you can go in the settings and check out notifications and scroll down to the bottom of that, and you will see what WEAs you have enabled at this time. You could have them enabled for any sort of weather-related emergency, for Amber Alerts, etc. I have them on for all, but you can also decide how you want to be alerted. It can be, just a text message, or you can have the thing which we've probably all experienced, your phone kind of like buzzes and screeches at you. That's kind of the higher setting that you can enable as well. So really important to get information in real time. I also sign up for any sort of threats within my region, which is Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And the reason I do that is because I have kids in childcare programs. And so I kind of like to know if there is a specific event. Obviously, one of my greater concerns is active shooters, which has happened in the past few years around here, so that I know that something might be happening at their school. There might be a lockdown. I might need to stay alert. So it really helps give me a sense of security to know that I'm getting real-time information through WEA enabled mobile devices. So check that out. Another thing that I'll kind of softly pitch is that the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA, has a weather radio. It's an all hazards weather radio. This is battery powered just in case you run out of batteries. You could also get them solar powered as well. And there's a nationwide network of radio stations after emergency that broadcast continuous weather information when something happens. This is not exciting stuff to listen to. It's very dry. It's very bland. but it is helpful should you lose power and you want to know what's going on in your area. They do a pretty good job of letting you know if there's road closures, if there's other events going on. So when our power goes out during a hurricane, I always look for my weather radio and just kind of keep it around. I'm not going to listen to it constantly, but I will check in occasionally just in case there's something really important that I would like to know because as you all are aware, often cell towers go down during that time, so I can't always rely on my phone to be the best source of information. So I'll pitch to NOAA Weather Radio, can purchase it for $10, $15 wherever you decide, but Amazon sells them. It's just a good thing to have in your emergency kit. The last thing I'll say about getting information is that there's tons of apps out there. American Red Cross has one, FEMA has one. As I mentioned, Chapel Hill has a specific one for alerts within Chapel Hill. And those can also give you real-time weather updates. You just have to turn those on and decide which emergency alerts you want to receive and when. Um, FEMA also has a cool feature where they can help you locate emergency shelters in your area. So just want to call that out. We'll also talk about another interesting way to find that out in just a moment. So step one, figure out where you're getting your information from. Step two is thinking about your shelter plan. So the two things I'm going to talk about are mass care shelters and shelter in place. Just for a little bit of background, I used to work in mass care shelters, specifically with kids who were in mass care shelters. So I'm relatively familiar with how those operate. The tip that I was going to call out that is also on ready.gov is you can text the word shelter, SHELTER in all caps, and your zip code. So shelter and then your zip code to the number 43362. Again, that's 43362. And that will let you know if there's any shelters open within a 100-mile radius of where you are. Now, if you practice that, if you just want to test it out, likely, if there's not an active event going on, it will say that there's no shelters open within your area. But a cool thing to know about should you need to locate a shelter immediately. It's just an easy way to kind of geolocate those. So again, you text shelter and your zip code to 43362 to find a mass care shelter. Now, should you need to shelter in place, meaning there's an event that's happened, either you have decided to stay in your home during an event that had warning, or there's an event such as a tornado or an earthquake that's happened very, very suddenly. Always the guidance is to go into an interior room with as few windows as possible. If you're feeling like you would like to take an extra step, you can also seal any potential windows that might be in there or air vents with plastic sheeting and duct tape. But a tip is always to consider measuring and cutting that sheeting in advance so that you can get that up very quickly. Again, that's really up to you. That's just what some folks decide to do. But getting into that interior, where I am right now, I'm in a basement. The downstairs bathroom is probably the safest place for me and my family to go should there be something like a tornado that happens in this area. So always think about where you want to shelter in place. And I think it's helpful to think about the two places you spend the most time. So if you spend a lot of time at your home and you spend a lot of time at your studio or wherever you work, those would be the two places that I would think about more heavily when figuring out where you want to shelter indoors. Now, if you don't shelter and you plan to evacuate, you want to think about how you want to do that. So it's really helpful to know at least two routes out of your primary residence that you could evacuate to. Where I'm located right now, there are two main streets that get to the interstate that would take me any direction out of this region, but they're also the most likely to get congested or have an accident. So there's another route that's probably double the distance, but might be the way I would go that's more rural. And that really just depends on what's happening. If there's road closures, if there's trees down, again, that's why it's so important to get real-time information on what's happening. But for you, think about that in terms of evacuation. What's your best case scenario? What's your backup evacuation route? Um, you want to identify a few different places you could go in the event of evacuation. Um, are you planning to go to a motel or a hotel? Think about the cost associated with that, as well as the likelihood that when an event happens, those areas fill up very, very quickly. Um, as a result of Hurricane Helene, hotels within a 2 hour radius of Western North Carolina have been incredibly full since that event happened. So even though you might think you're going to one hotel, you get there and it's full. So what's plan B? So definitely think through how you want to do that. If you have a friend that you're planning to stay with or a family member, give them a heads up that you're planning to stay with them. That's always helpful just so they can plan for that. Um, and if you're planning to stay in a mass care shelter and you have pets, think about double checking that they accept pets. So some do, not all do. Um, so most public shelters only allow service animals. So what happens is a lot of folks decide to sleep in their car with their pet, or they have to find another shelter. So when you're looking up shelters, if that's a consideration for you, please make sure that they allow pets or that you have an alternative plan for your pet because we know that most folks do not want to leave them in an emergency. So, step four, we're almost done with this, I promise. Step four, I think, is maybe one of the most important things and the one that's perhaps not talked about the most, and that's your family or household communication plan. So, it's very likely in the event of emergency that you're not going to be in close proximity with your loved ones. So, you want to talk about how you would reconnect, how you would communicate with each other, and then what your plan would be moving forward. So, for example, if something happened in this moment, my wife and I have decided that should we both be in the same area in Chapel Hill, we would divide and conquer with grabbing two different kids in two different locations. Also, when cell towers are down, it can be very difficult to call each other, so texting may get through better. So just want to give you that tip. It is helpful to do both, but if you can't reach somebody on the lines and they're tied up, texting might be another way to get through. So you want to figure out how you're going to communicate with that person. Also, where's your meetup location? Are you trying to get back to your house? Do you have an area outside of your house that's maybe 20 miles away that you could reconnect should you not be able to come back home? Um, and then if you have small kids, which I know I probably talk about this too much, but you want them to be familiar with basic details of you. So your first and last name, depending on their age, if they can say that, should somebody need to take care of them. Your phone number, which I know no one knows any phone numbers, but really important to know at least one. And then your address. And if your kids are too small to remember any of that, helpful to put a luggage tag on their backpack so that if somebody finds them, that they can take care of them. And the last thing I will call out is if they have any medicines or allergies that somebody would need to be aware of while they're taking care of them, great place to put that as well, just so that nothing happens while you're getting reconnected. But this family and household communication plan, I think, is the most important because it's the most actionable. And it also is kind of a thing where you need to revisit it. So I'll be honest, once a year I forget what our meetup plan is. And so we talk about it again, and maybe we shift it a little bit, maybe we don't, but it keeps an ongoing conversation happening. And it's just really important that everybody's on the same page because what you don't want to have in an emergency is that panic of like, where is everybody? What are we doing next? Because you never really make good decisions when you're in a really panic state. Um, So ready.gov has some cool templates you can fill out for family and household communication plans. But for me, I think it's a great place to start this whole preparedness journey. Then lastly, I'll talk about, which you've heard a million times and perhaps even have your own, and that is a preparedness kit. This is just a picture of one of them. You can see it's got pretty important stuff in there. Your first aid kit, that NOAA weather radio that I was talking about, it's in the upper left-hand corner. Cash is always super important should ATMs be down. And in fact, that's one of the first things I recommend doing when you know a disaster is coming is filling up your gas tank and getting cash, because that becomes the way that you're able to navigate the response. And then water and food, they recommend having enough for 72 hours. So if it's 1 gallon per person per day for 3 days. So one person in a household would need about 9 gallons um, of water for their emergency. Making sure that's correct. Is it my math is terrible today. Could just be 3 gallons. Let me double check that. Also want to have your flashlights, your important documents, um, any sort of medicines that you may need. And really the key to this is you want to have it in one space. So I know all of you have these things in your home, but they're probably scattered throughout. You don't want to be running to your closet or to your bedroom or to wherever to find these things and try to get them into one space. Helpful to have them in a grab bag. Also helpful to have one of these for kids. If you have kids, maybe it has more activities for them to do. Pets, what sort of things do you need for them? Do you have food for 72 hours for them? Do you have water for them as well? Um, and so I know there's some things happening in the chat. Molly, I've just been talking. Anything you want to pause on before I move into?
Nope, the chat's just me dropping links, including because I am who I am. I, I made a pretty robust emergency kit that's both a 72-hour go bag and a 72-hour shelter in place because
Nice.
that's what I deemed necessary based on the potential disasters where I live, which is in Central Falls. Uh, so I shared that spreadsheet with y'all, and it has links to a lot of the stuff that I had to buy. So
Oh, you're
it's a
right.
good place to
Awesome.
start for y'all.
Thank you for doing that, Molly. And my embarrassing math, 1 gallon per person per day is 3 gallons per person. 9 gallons would be if you had a three-person household. Okay, just wanted to cover that. I can sleep at night if I said that. Um, but thank you for sharing that, Molly. And again, ready.gov has some great information on how to get started. But with preparedness planning, you don't have to do it all at once. And I think sometimes thinking of doing it all at once prevents folks from doing anything. They just go, not today. I will say that folks tend to be most open to preparedness planning right after an emergency, because I think in real time you can see that this information and having these things in order is really helpful to help reduce some of the stress that comes along with those events. So enough about personal preparedness. We will now move into how to protect your artistic practice. Called this professional preparedness. It's not 100% the correct title. Um, but to begin, we're going to talk about a few steps that you can take. This poster here is called our Surf Plus Studio Safety Guide. It was created in 2018. It's something that folks can download and print out should you see fit. It's in Spanish and English, and really just kind of a very overall um, guide for how you can protect your studio. So you can see the different categories. It talks about building regulations, how to make sure your structure is safe, your electrical, which is something that is it's obviously one of the most dangerous factors within your practice, your HVAC, hazmat, insurance, safety, etc. We get a lot of artists who are newer artists who are just setting up a studio for the first time. They like to print these out and put them up. It's really helpful. We also have a more robust guide, which I'll talk about later on, that has checklists. But just want to call this out. These are both available for download and print, should you be interested. But a cool way to just kind of glance over all of the different safety measures and make sure that you feel you're adequately equipped to protect your studio. So, to begin with any sort of planning to protect your practice, most important thing is identifying your assets and your risks. So, I have a hard time with the word assets. It doesn't really mean anything to me. When I hear it, it kind of just glosses over me. But one way to think about it, or these are the things that are most critical to your artistic career, basically the things you cannot afford to lose. And we're going to talk about a couple different classes of assets to think about. And this might help you start to jot down which ones are most important for your practice. The first one that I think most folks think about, and this is where my brain would go, would be your structure. So this is the space that you conduct your practice, whether that's a studio space, whether that's a classroom space, or really any other physical structure that you use to support your practice. This would be your first asset that you would want to think about. What would happen if you lost your studio space or your classroom space? Um, so that's your first category. Secondly, we'll talk about things, and that's a pretty broad term, but these are, they could include your artwork itself. It can include your tools, which we know an artist without their tools is not able to create their work. It could also include the technology that you use to promote or sell your artwork or inventory your artwork. Your technology is very important to that. So those are kind of the things that you want to think about in terms of your assets. A third thing that I would never think about, candidly, are people and relationships. So who is essential to your practice? So if you closed your eyes right now and thought about the folks that are really critical to your practice, uh, that can include customers, they can include clients. Again, if you're a teacher, maybe students, any galleries you work with. Some folks have studio assistants or folks that help them with their practice. You want to start thinking through those. And again, something I want to think about, but also mentors. Are there folks that you rely on for inspiration or for guidance for your practice that you feel are really essential to creating your work? That would be, they would also be an asset in terms of people and relationships. And lastly, I'll mention events. We see this again and again after climate related disasters, which basically close all events for the foreseeable future. This takes a really big hit on folks' practice. So think about what shows, performances, classes that you're part of as part of your practice. And that would be another category of assets that you would want to consider and protect if you could. Um, so once you have your assets listed, step two is to identify any risk that could affect those assets. Um, so this part is probably the most challenging in that I think it's a little bit depressing, but I think it's a really good exercise to do. And again, you can look at this through different categories, which might be the easiest way to approach it. Think about what sort of disasters, both climate related and man-made, could affect your practice. So I'm in North Carolina. Obviously, hurricanes and flooding is going to be pretty up there, as well as tornadoes. But think about where you are. What sort of events are most likely? And then think about other stuff, other categories such as physical theft or damage to your studio equipment. So we have seen very unfortunate trend of a rise in arson cases over the last few years where folks are burning buildings that have a lot of different studios in them. Think about what effect that would have on your practice. Something we're all going to experience in some way, shape, or form are illnesses and injuries, not only to you as the artist, but also to those around you. What sort of effects would that have if you had to take time away from your practice in order to care for somebody that had an illness? One thing that I think is front of mind for all of us after COVID are economic downturns or market changes. Again, when disaster happens in an area and the tourism industry is decimated, that has a profound impact on a artist's ability to promote their work and to sell their work. Technological failures or data loss. What if lost all of your client information, if things got stolen or your system got hacked? Think about what sort of risk that would pose. And then again, something we all experience is personal emergencies. So you have a family crisis, you have a death in the family. That's another category of risk that you want to consider. So now you've identified your risk, you've identified your hazards. They have these really interesting things out there called risk assessment calculators. And what they do is they calculate the level of risk that you find for each of these emergencies. Let's say flooding is a 7 out of 10 on your scale, but its effect on your work would be a 10 out of 10. It will give you a score if you put in those two numbers for what level of risk that poses to your practice. So maybe it gives you a score of 92%. That's going to help you start to prioritize which risks are actually the most dangerous for your practice. Because you could create a list that's 100 pages long, but the likelihood of a lot of those events happening are much lower than they are some of the other types of emergencies. So I encourage you to Google that, to check it out. I find it a helpful tool, but it helps you kind of hone in on which things are most likely to happen so that you can plan to protect yourself from those. Um, so we talked about prioritization. I'm going to move into talking about documentation a little bit, but really this first step of assets and risk is crucial in setting up your whole plan. So I encourage you to take as much time as you need and really spend some time thinking through these things. All right, documentation. This never made sense to me, but I kind of get it. Documentation includes the what and the how. So by that, they mean what do you need to document? And on this right-hand side, we have all sorts of obviously very important documents, contracts, invoices, insurance policies, taxes, um, inventory of your artwork and studio contents. So the what and the how. And the how is how you're going to document those things. Um, so before I even kind of go through this, I think it's very important to know yourself when you approach this. So we have folks who are like, I'm going to buy the most expensive documentation software there is, and that's going to work for me. It's got all the bells and whistles. And my first question to them would be like, how often do you lose your wallet or your cell phone? Because if you're a type of person like me who is frequently searching for your wallet or cell phone, perhaps you don't need the most robust documentation software. Now, if you're a type of person who has multicolored sticky notes and you're hyper organized, then yeah, maybe you do. Maybe you're a type of person who would really find the benefit of that and find the investment worth it. So I just want to caution, know yourself, know what your style is before you even start deciding what sort of what sort of software or system you want to use to document and archive your work. Um, so one of the easiest ways that you can document things is through your smartphone. So you can take pictures of your artwork, of your tools, of your studio. You could save those to the cloud and name them in some way that makes sense so you could find them. And that is a great first step. I highly encourage everybody to do that. I can say after an emergency, when you're trying to submit documentation, whether it's FEMA, whether it's your insurance or business insurance, that photos is going to come up very quickly. What did it look like before? What does it look like now? So, if you haven't done that basic step, I would definitely encourage you to, take an hour and walk around and take a bunch of pictures and save them to the cloud. Easiest thing you can kind of get started with. Now, if you want to take that a step further, you can consider having a spreadsheet, which has a little bit more detail. So maybe that includes the title of each thing you're documenting, its dimensions, its medium, its price, sales record, make, model, description, etc. We have some really great spreadsheets on our website that are free that you can download to document and inventory your artwork and your practice. So definitely check those out. Um, so, if you have pictures of everything, that's great. If you have pictures in a spreadsheet, that's even smoother, right? So it's kind of showing both things in different ways. Um, when you're ready to take it to the next level, I mentioned our inventory spreadsheet. We also have one for equipment and for sales and consignments. So all of those are great, but you can also purchase a comprehensive inventory and documentation software. There's several options available. Some of those can be very affordable for as little as maybe $50 a year to much more robust. So some of those might be $1,000 a year. Um, and many of those focus on artwork itself, such as contacts and consignments. However, GYST, GIST, is an exception because it also includes artist supplies. So, consider researching, consider trying out different tools, but I'm always hesitant to walk into a technology sales pitch uninformed of what my needs are because I have a real concern about getting upsold into a system that's too much for what I actually need. So I encourage you before you really research those tools, spend some time understanding what your needs are and how you're planning to use this information. And then that will help guide your decisions as well as hopefully protect your budget a little bit. So that's documentation. I've done a terrible job calling out artists today, but this Sarah Evanson was a Get Ready recipient, and she purchased some things to help organize her artwork. And so that's another great use of a Get Ready grant. Organization is definitely a pretty popular activity. Okay, we're going to move into talking about business insurance. And this, we're going to kind of get a little bit heavier, but not too heavy in this conversation. I want to go ahead and call out we have a business insurance guidebook. This is a super great resource for folks. It's maybe, I'm a slow reader, so for me, it's like a 15 to 20-minute read. For most folks, it's probably like an 8-minute read. But really does a good job of calling out different categories of insurance and giving you a very quick snapshot about what they're about. So, I definitely encourage you if you're in the place where you're thinking about purchasing business insurance or you've already purchased it and you're like, is this really the right package for me? Definitely check out this guidebook. I think it's a really great resource and perhaps my favorite Surf Plus resource. But we're going to talk about a few different types of insurances today. Insurance is obviously your first step in protecting yourself and your practice and your assets. And there are several different types of coverages to consider. We talked about kind of the first asset folks think about is structure. So the first insurance we'll talk about is property or building insurance. And this coverage protects the physical structure of your studio. So a lot of folks think because their studio is located in their house, that their homeowner's policy will cover the event of an emergency. And I would caution them to very carefully read that policy because occasionally that could be true, but more often than not, it is not true. So folks have a tornado hit their house, it destroys their home and studio. They try to submit for losses to their studio and they're declined because they're like, that's not covered under your homeowner's insurance. So definitely, if you're under that impression, I encourage you to check that out. Typically, that does require a separate building insurance policy. Um, Also, business personal property insurance. This protects the content of your studio. So we talked a lot about your tools, your equipment, your raw materials, even works in progress and finished works can be covered under this. So it's definitely a nice addition to have, especially if you have really expensive tools. So for all the folks who have lost kilns recently, that is thousands of dollars, right? So this could be an insurance that helps protect them. Um, This next one I had no idea about. This is inland marine. So this protects your work and property while it's in transit or it's away from your studio. So when you are maybe traveling with your work because you're teaching or you're setting up an installation or you're in an arts festival, this can protect that work while it's in transit. Um, and then personal property of others. If you do any sort of repair work, any sort of conservation work, you may consider purchasing this so that it protects their work while it's in your care, just in case something happens. I will mention if you damage somebody else's property, like you put a hammer through a painting, this is not gonna help you with that. But if something else happens to it, maybe water damage, etc., then perhaps it would. And I'm speaking very generally about these categories. Obviously, my note of caution is double check everything and make sure you really understand what's in your policy before making any assumptions about your business insurance. And so liability is the next piece we'll talk about. This is probably what I think most of slash would always first consider when I heard of insurance is like, what happens if somebody trips and falls on your porch? That is what most folks think about in terms of general liability. So that protects you if somebody is injured while they're on your property or if your property causes damage to others. So that's general liability. I know a lot of folks think about that first and foremost. Um, Nice part about liability is it stays with you when you're at a location other than your studio. So there's a few different types of liability that may also be applicable to you, kind of based on your practice. First is products and operations liability. So that covers you in the event that someone's injured by your product while you're performing your work somewhere. So if you do a lot of public events with your work and somehow your work ends up injuring somebody, however that happens, maybe it gets knocked over onto them, maybe it breaks, maybe wind knocks it down. This is something that could protect you in that event. This third one, which is really important for folks who maybe are teachers or write a lot and give any sort of advice to folks. This is errors and omissions. Um, it protects you if somebody is injured following your advice because of instruction you omitted. So if you forgot to mention something and somebody ends up getting injured as a result, this policy can protect you from that. And lastly, I will, on this slide, talk about umbrella insurance. Umbrella insurance is exactly like it sounds. It's an umbrella, meaning that it protects you uh, beyond when your liability is exhausted. So for that reason, umbrella insurance is a lot cheaper than folks realize because the folks who are doing it assume that most losses will be covered by other liability policies. So that's how they're able to keep their costs down. But it kicks in when all the other liabilities exhausted in increments of typically $1 million. So you could buy $1 million of umbrella insurance, you could buy $2 million of umbrella insurance. And again, it's much cheaper than folks realize and really provides that security blanket. I think it cannot be understated that it's just critical for helping you sleep at night as well as providing that full protection for your practice. There's a lot of insurances that you probably have um, heard about and probably have more information than I do on them. But one that everyone's always talking about is flood insurance. At this moment, 6% of US households have flood insurance, and there's a lot of reasons for that. In North Carolina, flood insurance costs vary greatly depending on where you were located and what sort of floodplain or flood map your residence or studio is located in. The cost can range from a few $100s a month to up to $5,000 a month. So you've probably heard that. A lot of folks say I can't afford flood insurance. That is absolutely a factor. And I will say, when I moved into the home I'm in now 8 years ago, we had a lower flood risk than we do today. So those maps change, which then causes a ripple effect where the cost of flood insurance will go up. Um, so flood insurance is definitely a policy to look at. There is a national flood insurance program that you can purchase policies through, but this will not be included in your general business insurance. In addition, if you're in an area that has earthquakes, earthquake insurance typically is not covered. Um, and there's all sorts of other policies you might want to check out in this guidebook, like extended business income. So that extends payments for any sort of losses of business income beyond business interruption coverage limits. So also want to think about workers' compensation. Um, Commercial auto coverage is obviously very important for many folks. And really, ultimately, what you want to do before you get into any insurance conversation is have a good sense of the size and scope of your operations. And what we call that is building a commentary. So this is really a detailed plan of your business operations so that folks understand what your assets are, what your needs are, and then they can hopefully you can shop around with different insurance agencies and find underwriters who can provide you the appropriate coverage. So typically these commentaries are 1 to 2 pages. And you want to sketch out all of the things that we've talked about. You want to talk about your assets. You want to talk about your risk. You're going to talk about, what you see as being your greatest priority at this time. There's also folks who provide commercial lines of coverage, meaning it's kind of a little bit of everything. So maybe they have worked with other artists that kind of have a similar scope as you, and they might sell you a little bit of, they sell you general liability, but maybe a little bit of products and operations, or maybe a little bit of some other additional policy because they realize that that's what most folks are interested in. So you can definitely check out commercial lines. They can be a little bit a cheaper way to get things. Um, and we always encourage folks to feel very comfortable in conversations with insurance agents. Don't feel like they're talking over your head or you don't understand what they're saying. I think that tactic of kind of dazed and confusing folks is really not great because I personally feel at that point that I start to distrust the sales pitch if I can't follow along with it. So I encourage you to ask whatever questions you need to become very familiar with your policies. And if you're getting any sort of spidey sense, strange feelings about insurance company, then check out someone else. You don't want to sleep at night not really being aware of what your insurance policy does and doesn't cover. Um, Obviously, I won't explain this to you all because you know, but insurance companies have lower premiums for policies with higher deductibles. Um, so they very much arrange themselves in a way that makes sure that they are not paying out huge sums of money to a lot of folks. Um, a resource that may be of interest to you is to check out the financial stability of an insurance underwriter. You can check out a thing called AM, like morning time, A.M. And that provides free basic rating reports on insurance companies. So from there, you can ask insurance representatives if they've had any claims on the type of insurance that they're offering and questions like what is your general turnaround time? Um, and I think that will help guide you to find a package that's helpful for you. I also will say a lot of artists prefer to ask their friends. They say, who are you using? Do you like them? Do you not like them? And that word of mouth is really important in this space, as I'm sure you all are aware. So I think that's all I'll say on business insurance. We also have a video that will be uploaded to our YouTube channel very soon, which is a webinar on business insurance with a business insurance expert from ACT Insurance. And he basically just answers questions throughout it that folks have about insurance. So I'll make sure that that resource is available probably in the next month or so. But feel free to check out that video as well if you have specific questions. They may have been addressed during that. I'm going to check the time real quick. We're doing good. I only have 2 more slides. First of which, this is only exciting to me. I don't expect it to be exciting to you, but we have these new guides, new updated guides on our website as of October 1st. I think they look really snazzy. Thanks to Elena Spate, who is our graphic designer, as well as Emily Moses, formerly of the Kentucky Arts Council, who helped update the content. All sorts of cool information in these. There's just a couple that I want to call your attention to. First is our studio safety guide. This is the one that I was mentioning, has checklists in there similar to the poster, but a little bit more comprehensive. Great place to get started as you're looking at your risk and your assets and you're figuring out how you want to put together your plan. This is a great guide to get you there. I also want to mention a legacy guide. Although it feels like an odd time to call it out, you always want to be thinking about how to put together wills and estate planning and what's going to happen to your tools, what's going to happen to your artwork, what's going to happen to your practice in the future. Legacy Guide is a great way to do that. But we also have all these sub guides on getting started in emergency preparedness, protecting your records, setting up personal networks. And if you go to our website on our Studio Protector, you can also look at all the guides at once. If you click the start here on the left-hand side, it's the full PDF. I think it's like 102 pages, so it's a little bit overwhelming, but a lot of great content in there. And it has a navigational piece at the top so you can hop around to what's of interest to you. So I want to call out this resource to you all as you start formalizing your plan and asking a little bit deeper questions about what your needs are. Also want to call out some resources from partners. I mentioned ready.gov. I always do because I think they're a great general resource for personal preparedness. But HINTEF, the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, has some good resources on saving your family treasures. So if an event happens, like a climate-related disaster, they have some good tips for you to salvage as much as you can. Some really critical first steps you need to take, especially when it comes to water damage to help protect your things. So I want to call out HINTEF as well as Nest. Nest and Etsy and the Environmental Defense Fund created these climate guides, they're calling them, for makers, such as many of you all. We partnered with them on this. Actually, a lot of the content from our studio protector guides are in here as well, but an additional resource and it's formatted a little bit differently. So just want to call that out as you're doing your planning. And should you ever need response focused materials, they have a responding guide as well. And lastly, this is my information. Not pressuring anyone to have questions at this time, but if something comes up or you're looking for a specific webinar resource, please feel free to email me. We'll see what we have available. But I think we have about 20 minutes or so for questions. I will stop sharing, but I appreciate everybody's time and attention.
All right, y'all. Feel free to unmute yourself or ask questions in the chat. Um, and I can start us off. I've heard from some folks who are having trouble finding a good provider for business insurance locally in Rhode Island. And I know it's hard for you, particularly because you're far away, to tell us where to look other than asking other folks. But
Mhm.
where would you look if you lived in Rhode Island and needed and were a craft artist? Or, we have some muralists here. We have a very multidisciplinary artist that does music and zines. And so, where would you look?
Great question. I think that ACT Insurance webinar is helpful in this way. So I will say, to be cagey, we never promote one insurer over another, just because we're not really in that game, but we do get asked this question a lot. So I will share that webinar so you can check it out. They have some resources on there for other companies you could check out. We also have some information that was formerly on our website of a list of insurers. And so Molly, I'll circle back with you so you could share that. I think there's like 8 or 10 on there. and that might be a good starting place. I can't say they're specific to Rhode Island, but most of them are nationwide. And so, yeah, again, I think it's helpful to have a matrix for what your needs are and then compare them against each other. So having multiple conversations with different insurers is probably the best route for you because, to your point, depending on your practice, uh, some packages might not be applicable. So they might try to sell you a package that you're like, that really doesn't fit my needs. And if that's the case, then, it's time to move on, scratch them off your sheet and go to the next one. So I'll circle back with you, Molly, and you can, if you're comfortable, share that in the after notes.
Oh yeah, I'll be for all y'all, I'll be sending an email probably Wednesday based on how my life is this week that has like a number of the links that have either been in the chat or we've talked about today, and I'll include whatever Cameron sends me between now and Wednesday-ish or later.
Yeah, and I feel a little guilty we took that down as we redid our website. But we also had an issue where all of the information was constantly outdated, like as rates
Yeah.
change and as things change. And so it was a little bit of a risky game to manage that website in an honest way. So yeah, but it still exists. I can share it.
All right. Okay, so MJ in the chat would love the list of places to start, but they had a good experience with Emma Pickering, an agent at the Northeast AAA, about an unusual project.
Hmm,
So
cool.
that's super interesting.
See, I love
Um,
that. So it's the word of mouth that really like works
yeah,
and yeah.
yeah, and as MJ said, I'm also surprised. Didn't expect AAA to be an insurer for art,
Mhm.
like theirs. So that's great.
That's very cool. Thank you for sharing that, MJ.
Yeah, no problem. I'm digging through my emails because I was asking around other artists. So if I can find a couple more names, I'll put them in. And yeah, it's tricky as an artist who um, has a very varied business.
Mhm.
I'm not a straightforward anything.
Yeah.
And so it ends up being it will be important for me, if anyone else is in this boat, to find someone who can kind of translate my practice into the legalese that needs to happen for insurance to make sense and be beneficial to me, rather than a rote boilerplate plan that could work for someone who is simply a session musician or simply a painter who sells at fairs, or not saying that that's a simple job, but it's more
Mhm.
straightforward to be insured if your practice is a little more one or two note than like a cacophony of many random wiggles.
I love that description of your practice, MJ. A cacophony of wiggles. It's very accurate, and I love it.
And I think you hit such an important point is that, I think a lot of artists feel this way. And you don't want an insurance agent who doesn't get that. If they have not worked with artists, if they don't seem like they're following you on what you're talking about, that's not a good sign, right? Because then you're going to be like misaligned throughout the whole partnership. But if you get an insurance agent who's worked with artists, who understands how to create business insurance that makes sense for your practice, then that goes a long way. So again, I will share that ACT Insurance webinar because I think that was a question on there. Somebody's like, practice is everywhere. What do you want me to do? Because I think that's a helpful resource though. And thank you for sharing your story, MJ. That is, yeah, what I hear again and again. Any other questions? Personal or professional? Personal is always easier because that's
How's your dog doing? What's your dog's name? Can we see your
my
dog?
dog. I meant personal preparedness, but yeah, personal. That's good. He's fine. He's a beagle mix, and as I mentioned, I'm terrified that he's going to go off like a car alarm at any moment. But I don't know. He's in the house. I'm a little shaky, but he's good.
And I'm the person that usually has the pets like showing up in the Zoom meeting, so I always like to ask people about their pets.
His name's Hagrid, by the way. Harry
Hagrid.
Potter.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Most important. Yeah.
yeah.
Any other questions? I don't keep folks just to keep you. So if you don't, that's
Yeah.
fine. But want to make sure if while we have time. Another is Richard Blackman does insurance for Dirt Palace and
That's
AS20. Okay.
that's great. Um, because those are both also places that have cacophonies of wiggles in their under their roofs, in the best way.
MJ is on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and y'all, Cameron is very reachable. I'm also
Mhm.
reachable. I know y'all. And this is like something that I'm newer to this field than Cameron, but it's been a couple of years now. So also happy to talk about stuff. And as you saw, I have that extensive spreadsheet of disaster prepare my emergency kit. So happy to talk about that and other things I'm thinking about adding, like a camping stove and some propane.
Yeah,
Um, I like to add a couple things to it every now and then. I think I'm lucky slash unlucky enough to know a bunch of artists who are in Western North Carolina. So I'm seeing what they needed and adding that to my kit list, which is a really, that's kind of how it is, right? It's like I'm learning from what they're going through, which is hard, but good.
yeah. And every year I look at my kit, I realize I put some strange stuff in there. I think there's some spur of the moment like inspiration when I'm doing it. And I go to a lot of disaster conferences where they give out weird stuff and that goes in the kit. But then next year I'm like, I have no idea how I would use that. So I also try to balance like weight of the bag versus like actual odds that I'll ever use that. So I think my kit has gotten smaller over the years.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, more essential stuff.
And I have things like a deck of cards in mine because if you're going to be without power for several days, you're not only going to be focused on survival, you're also going to be focused on being mentally okay. And playing cards is my jam. So, and it's, easy and small and can fit in there. So, stuff like that too, particularly if you have kids, think about that.
Totally.
Okay, I think we're done.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for joining me. I really appreciate, like I said, your commitment to this. And if you start getting into your planning and have any questions, you have my email address, you have Molly's information as well. We'd be happy to help in any way. But yeah, just really appreciate you showing up. I know it's not the most exciting topic, but I'm happy that I had some time with you this afternoon.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Have a great rest of your day.